There is a room you have never been invited into. A long hall lit by candles, men in silk and velvet standing close to a throne, saying nothing they truly think. Women with careful smiles, advisors with careful words. Then the man walked into the throne room, insulted the king, and walked out alive. Every court in Europe had one, a man whose entire purpose was to say the thing no one else could say. Out loud, in front of everyone, wrapped in a joke, the king laughed, or he didn't. Either way, the fool walked out. That was his job. This is Hands of History. Tonight, the court fool. Picture the room. It is evening, somewhere in France, sometime in the 16th century. The hall is wide and high, and the light from the candles does not reach the ceiling. The smell is tallow and perfume, roasted meat and cold stone. The king sits at the head of a long table. Around him are the men who run his kingdom, generals, bishops, treasurers, the heads of great families. Each of them has something to gain or something to lose, and so each of them speaks carefully. Each word weighed before it leaves the mouth, each sentence built like a small fortress. The room was not only French, it was not only European. Wherever there was a court, wherever power concentrated itself in one body, in one throne, in one person whose word was law, there was also, almost always, someone whose job was to say the things that word could not say. A scholar named Beatrice Otto spent years mapping this phenomenon across cultures, and her conclusion was simple. The court jester was a universal character, more or less interchangeable, regardless of the time or place. China has the longest documented history of court jesters of any civilization. The tradition began, by some accounts, before Europe had anything resembling a court at all. A jester named Twisty Pole is said to have talked the Emperor Qin Shi Huang out of painting the Great Wall by joking that they would not have a drying room large enough. Whether the story is true in its details matters less than what it preserves. The image of a man who could say to the most powerful ruler in the world that his idea was absurd and survived the saying. In China, the fool was often dressed not as a motley entertainer, but as a scholar sage. The costume was different. The function was identical. At the Ottoman court, dwarfs, mutes, and jesters appear in payment records and uniform accounts from the reign of Mehmed II in the 15th century. First accounts of jester-like figures go back further still, to the 5th dynasty of Egypt, where pharaohs employed performers with unusual physical attributes brought from distant lands. The pattern is always the same. Power creates a kind of silence around itself. The closer you stand to the throne, the more carefully you speak. And so the throne invents a figure who is exempt from that silence, who exists precisely to break it, in ways the throne can control, or believes it can control. Scholars have counted 68 individual fools documented at the courts of Spain, 57 in France, 45 in England, 23 in Italy, 19 in Germany, and a few even in Iceland. These are only the named ones, the ones the record chose to keep. The unnamed ones were more numerous. They worked the same halls, said the same things, and disappeared without leaving a number behind them. Every court had a fool. Not every fool left a name. There is one exception. He stands near the edge of the table, or moves between the guests, or sits on a low stool near the hearth. He wears a costume that is not quite clothing. Bright colors, mismatched, absurd. A hood with 2 points that hang down beside his face, each tipped with a small bell. In his hand, a stick with a carved head on the end of it, a miniature version of himself. He is the fou du roi, the king's fool. His job, on paper, is to entertain, to make the king laugh, to break the tension of long evenings, to fill the silences that protocol cannot fill. But that is not his only function, and everyone in the room knows it. The fool is the one person at court who can say what no one else will say, not because he is brave, but because he is officially not serious. His words come wrapped in a costume, delivered as joke, absurdity, as performance, and so they can land and then dissolve. A courtier who said the same thing would be risking his position, perhaps his life. The fool says it, and the room laughs, and the king either hears it or pretends not to. Either way, no one is held accountable for a joke. This is the mechanism, and it is both a privilege and a trap. The French called it the liberté du bouffon, the freedom of the fool. But freedom is not quite the right word. The fool's license to speak truth was real, but it was also conditional. It required constant calibration. Say too little, and you are merely entertainment. Bells and acrobatics, nothing more. Say too much. Step outside the invisible boundary, and the license dissolves without warning. A fool named Triboulet served the court of Francis I in the early 16th century. He was said to have a sharp tongue and a sharper sense of exactly how far that tongue could go. He survived at court for years, through insults that would have cost a courtier his head. One evening, it is told, he slapped the king on the backside in front of the assembled court. Francis was furious. He threatened execution. Then, in a moment of mercy, he offered the fool a choice. Come up with an apology more insulting than the original offense, and live. Triboulet thought for a moment, then said, "I am so sorry, Your Majesty. I mistook you for the Queen." The king laughed. Triboulet lived, but the story does not end there. He had offended the king again not long after, and Francis, still in a generous mood, offered him yet another grace. Choose the manner of your death. Triboulet answered without hesitation. I choose, he said, to die of old age. He was banished from France, but he died in the countryside, at an advanced age, as he had requested. This is what the license looked like in practice. It was not freedom. It was a blade you could use, if you were skilled enough, if you could hold it without cutting your own hand. Triboulet could. Not every fool could. And the record does not preserve the names of those who miscalculated. What the license required was a particular kind of intelligence, not the intelligence of a scholar or a general. Something more like the intelligence of a tightrope walker, who reads the air constantly, who knows that the ground is always there, and who chooses, moment by moment, not to fall. The profession had a body. Most court fools were men. Many had physical differences, dwarfism, unusual stature, a hunched back, a face that deviated from the courtly ideal of beauty. This was not coincidence. The medieval and Renaissance courts had a long tradition of keeping what they called natural fools, people whose bodies or minds placed them outside the ordinary social order. Their difference was the point. It marked them as other, as not quite inside the game. Everyone else was playing, and that marking was what gave them their license. To be visibly outside the hierarchy was to be, paradoxically, useful to it. A man with a twisted spine could say what a man in fine clothes could not, because no one confused the two. The fool's body was a costume in itself, a constant signal. This person does not belong to the usual rules, and so the usual rules do not fully apply to him. But the costume was also a cage. The fool's difference made him safe to laugh at. It made his words easier to dismiss. It meant that however sharp his intelligence, however true his observations, he could always be returned to the status of spectacle. The king could hear him and then stop hearing him, and the difference between those two moments was entirely the king's to decide. The professional fools, the fous à gage, the fools for wages, were something slightly different. They were trained, or they trained themselves. They learned to read a room, to time a joke, to use their bodies as instruments. They were not outside the social order by accident of birth. They had chosen or been placed into a role that required them to perform that outsideness every day. To enter that profession as a woman was a different kind of problem. The male fool's body carried the meaning of the role because it was legible as other. A woman's body at a French court was not a body outside the hierarchy. It was a body that the hierarchy organized itself around in very specific ways. A woman who wanted to hold a fool's license had to build her own version of the role from the inside out. Her name appears in the records of the royal household as Mathurine de Vallois. Her title is listed as plaisante, roughly the one who gives pleasure, who entertains. In the financial registers of the court, she is recorded as a folle à gage, a fool for wages, salaried, official, employed. She served 3 kings. She came to the court during the reign of Henry III, and she stayed through the reign of Henry IV, and she was still present under Louis XIII until sometime around 1627. Nearly 4 decades of service, the deaths of kings and the succession of crowns, the wars of religion, the slow, violent consolidation of a France that was still not certain what it wanted to be. She did not wear the motley, the traditional fool's costume, the party-colored hood with bells, the marotte, the bright mismatched garments. She refused it or never took it up. Instead, she dressed as an Amazon warrior, a breastplate, a wooden shield, a wooden sword. The costume of a fighter, a hero from classical mythology, a woman who stands outside the ordinary categories of gender, not by being diminished, but by being enlarged. This was not a small choice. Every fool's costume is an argument. The traditional motley argued, "I am harmless, I am a spectacle, I am not to be taken seriously." Mathurine's costume argued something different. It said, "I am a figure of power, unconventional power, theatrical power, but power nonetheless. And behind this shield, I will say what I have to say." She was Catholic, and she was fierce about it. The court of Henry IV was a court navigating the aftermath of the wars of religion, a king who had converted from Protestantism to Catholicism to take the throne, a kingdom still divided, still bleeding. Mathurine used her position to mock the Huguenot reformers, to argue for the old faith in the only language the court allowed her, the language of comedy. There is a record of a contemporary author who joked that Mathurine and her fellow jesters were Catholic only because they knew that Protestant reformers, if they came to power, would abolish the fool's profession entirely. The joke is probably not far from the truth. The Reformed tradition had no patience for this kind of licensed absurdity. Mathurine's faith and her profession were, in this sense, the same wager. The date is the 28th of December, 1594. It is evening, and the king is in his apartments in the Louvre. Paris has been his city for only a few months. Henry IV entered Paris in March of that year, after years of war, after his conversion, after negotiations that had stretched across a decade. The city received him, but not everyone in Paris was pleased. A young man named Jean Châtel had come to the palace. He was 19 years old, a student, a Catholic who believed that a heretic king was no king at all. He entered the king's apartments. He carried a knife. The knife caught the king. A cut to the lip or to the nose, accounts differ. It was not a mortal wound. What happened next is recorded in the court registers with a specificity that suggests someone who was there wrote it down. Mathurine was in the room. When Châtel moved toward the door, she moved first. She barred the passage, stood in the doorway with presumably her wooden sword and her Amazon's shield, and held the position. The young assassin was stopped. He was arrested and later executed. And then Henry turned to his fool and said, with the kind of logic that belongs only to kings, "Devil take that fool with her tricks." He had her arrested. Not because he believed she was complicit. Most historians read it as a moment of shock, a reflex. A king who had just been stabbed and was looking for someone to blame. She was released. The incident passed. She continued her service. But consider what had just happened. A woman had risked her body to protect the king, had done the thing the guards were supposed to do, had held the door, and the king's first response was to arrest her. The fool had spoken, this time not in words, but in action, and the answer was the same as always. The license had a limit, even when the fool was right, even when she was loyal, even when she had just saved the king's life. The hierarchy could always take the moment back. In 1615, a pamphlet was printed in Paris. Its title was something like "The Fury of Mathurine against the Misshapen Reformers of France." It was attributed to her. Whether she wrote it herself, or whether it was written in her name by someone who understood the value of her voice, is not certain. But the argument was hers, and the tone was hers, satirical, sharp, impatient with people she considered dangerous. It is the only text that survives in her name. Think about what this means. Mathurine de Vallois served 3 kings. She was present at an assassination attempt. She survived 4 decades in one of the most dangerous courts in European history. She made people laugh, and sometimes she made them think. And sometimes she said things that no one else would say. And what remains of her voice is one pamphlet, 16 pages, perhaps fewer. The rest is silence and administrative records, and a signed document from 1628 that sold at auction centuries later. The pamphlet is not the record of a fool. It is the record of a woman who understood that the spoken word disappears. The performance disappears, the evening in the hall, the joke that made the king laugh, the observation that landed and then dissolved. All of it disappears. She wrote one thing down, signed it, sent it to a printer. It is not exactly a monument, but it is the only stone she left. The spoken word is the fool's medium and the fool's limitation. Mathurine spent 40 years speaking into rooms that did not archive her. The pamphlet was, perhaps, her answer to that problem. A way of saying, I was here, I had thoughts, I was not only entertainment. The last entry in the court registers that names her is sometime around 1627. She would have been old by then. How old exactly is not known, because her birth date was not considered worth recording. She had served through the assassination of Henry IV in 1610, through the regency of Marie de Medici, through the early years of Louis XIII and the rising power of Cardinal Richelieu. The courts she served were growing colder, more formal, more controlled. The fool's profession required a certain kind of court to exist. It required a space where the unofficial could briefly become official, where the licensed absurd could speak alongside the serious. That space was shrinking. The theater was growing. The stage was beginning to absorb the functions that the fool had held. The comedy, the satire, the space for what could not be said directly. The signed document from 1628, a 5-page manuscript, handwritten, her name at the bottom, surfaced at auction in the 20th century. What it says is not fully known. It is catalogued, not transcribed. The words in it are hers. But they have not been read widely, and perhaps they have not been read at all for a very long time. After 1628, there is nothing. Not a death record, not a pension entry, not a mention in a memoir or a letter. She was present in the court registers for nearly 40 years, and then she was not. The profession she had built ended before her, or around her, or because of her age, and the court moved on. The bells stopped. The Amazon put down her wooden sword. The room continued its business. There is something that does not change across these centuries, across these cultures, across these thousands of miles of different stone floors and different throne rooms. The need for a fool is the need for a mirror, not a flattering one, the kind that shows you what you look like when no one is watching. Every ruler, sooner or later, surrounds himself with people who tell him what he wants to hear. This is not malice. It is simple survival. You tell the powerful man what pleases him, because the alternative is dangerous. And so the ruler, if he is wise enough, invents a workaround. He hires someone whose entire job is to say the thing no one else will say. He wraps that person in bells and motley and calls it entertainment. And he listens, or he does not. But the fool knows something the ruler does not always admit. The license is borrowed. The bells are a costume, not a shield. The laughter of the room can end at any moment. And when it ends, the fool is just a person standing in front of a king with no protection left. Mathurine de Vallois knew this. She held the door against an assassin and was arrested for it. She spoke for 40 years and left one pamphlet behind. She was not the first. She was not the last. She was one of thousands across centuries and continents who took the same wager. Speak the truth in the only language power will tolerate. Wear the costume. Hold the line. Hope the king is listening. That was Hands of History. Next time, we go back inside another room, another profession, another person history forgot to name. If this is where you want to return, subscribe. We will be here. Until next time, sleep well.